Well, welcome again to our November redesign webinar. And once again, we've got the very learned Dr. Wyckoff leading us through this conversation, and the very learned Mr. Infamous. So we're excited to have with us our guest, Mr. Fred Van Rankin, and he is superintendent up at Twin Valleys USD 240. And I see that we have Mr. Clark, Ms. Bircher, Mr. Reed, and we're waiting on Mr. Bart Schwartz.
Bart Schwartz will be joining us. Bart Schwartz from Greenbush. He's kicking off their redesign meeting first, and then he will go to the studio to join us. So he's actually involved. Fred, you want to turn your video on so that people see what a superintendent looks like 2 days before Thanksgiving? There you go.
Oh, no.
Fred, welcome.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Good enough.
Hey, I invited Fred to join us this morning because we get a lot of discussion among superintendents about what were the pitfalls, how did you do it? And so, Fred, we're going to grill you pretty good today. As a superintendent, you're used to that.
Had a board meeting last night.
And you're still smiling.
Yep, always.
Fred, tell us, what led you to decide to become a redesign school?
Of course, it was at the end of my first year as a superintendent when this opportunity came around, and we had felt that we were in a good position to take that step just based upon where the district was. There's 4 administrators in the district, myself and 3 principals. 3 of the 4 of us were new. And our board of ed was very open to doing something a little bit different for our kids, especially when we had been going over data. We had, during the course of that first year that I was here, we had several community type World Cafe style meetings, in which we were asking parents, what do you want for your kids? You know, what are the good things? What are the bad things? We actually based a lot of those questions, on the 4 R's, some of the stuff within the 4 R's, although I'm not really focusing on the 4 R's in relation to KISA. But it was a good starting point for us to do that. And then also looking at our data, in terms of of course, that post-secondary success kind of came out towards the end of that first year. But also looking at ACT scores, things like the MAP scores, things of that nature. Just in terms of looking at student achievement, we were lacking, for 4 or 5 years previous. ACT scores were below the state average, in my opinion, well below the state average, more so than they should be. And it's not like we had 95% of our kids taking the assessment, those kinds of things. Just a lot of a general apathy. And honestly, from a personal perspective, this is the only reason I became a superintendent, is that we look at making changes on what we're doing for kids. Once again, I'll preface all this stuff with saying nobody has done anything wrong. I just think that we can do a lot better or differently, not better, differently for our kids that will result in better returns for them personally. I think we've been too system focused and not student focused. And the direction from the State Board of Ed about, trying to make it the most successful for each potential student, I think it was a perfect opportunity for us to jump in. So that's the reason why. And there's other things associated with that, but that's my personal reason. That's the reason I'm a superintendent, is because I don't like about 3/4 of the stuff I have to do with being a superintendent. So I'll do those other things, but it's about making the best environment for kids.
Hey, by the way, we have a lot of people starting to join us. If you have a question of Fred at any time, or any of us at any time, jump in and ask it. Fred, one of the things that, now you're a Mercury school, so you were one of the early arrivals into redesign. And in the middle of that process, we started to shift from we measured success by test scores to measuring success by how are our kids doing when they leave us.
Right.
How did that transition affect what you were doing?
I don't know really, Steve, if it affected us that much. That metric, that post-secondary success metric itself was a positive for us at that time, just to show, because I think in a lot of communities, and it's a positive thing that people have a lot of pride in their school systems and stuff. And it's not that we shouldn't have. We should be, happy and thankful. But when you have one of your schools in your district that has like a 34% post-secondary success rate, that's not something to jump up and down about, even though it's a small population. Overall, our post-secondary success rate is like 54%, but, with the 2 attendance centers. But once again, when you look at, that's not that good. I don't think so. That was a positive metric for us to use as a partial springboard. And in conversations with parents and with and our Board of Education, and that's one thing that I'll make real clear, is that our Board of Ed is behind us very squarely, because that's one thing that we have focused on a tremendous amount, is trying to bring everyone along at the same pace as best as possible. And it's never enough. It's never the right information. It was never dispensed in the right way. It was never dispensed at the right time to the right individual. And that's okay. We know that. And I keep telling my guys all the time, they get tired of my Fredisms, but I just tell them, guys, information isn't important till it's important. And they look at me the first time I said that, they thought, what are you smoking? And it's like, and then we'll go through something where they should have done something and they've been told to have done that, but they didn't do it because they didn't think it was important to them at that time, not realizing this is the reason why, type of stuff. So we're all guilty of that kind of stuff, myself included. But I think that data, I don't know if that data was as important as just the underlying motivation for us to make changes to our system to help all of our learners. One of my attendance centers has 70% free and reduced lunch. That's the one that has the real poor secondary success, post-secondary success rate. And it's acceptable. You know what I mean? It was kind of like, hey, nobody complained. So we kind of had to bring that stuff out to create some cognitive dissonance a little bit with them. And we've done that, some, but it's tough, man. It's hard.
Well, when you first started going to your board, we're pretty in tune to going to our board and telling them all the good things we're doing. And all of a sudden you were starting to say, we may not be doing as well as we'd like to believe. Did that go okay with your board?
It did, but once again, I was fortunate. I was new. I was the new guy. I had credibility. You become an idiot with each additional year. You become less intelligent in the system that you're in. You're no longer the person that has any credibility because they know you. That profit in your own backyard type of stuff. And so I think that was a real positive for us, and that 3 of the 4 of us from the administrative side were new. We were all 3 pretty progressive from an educational perspective. And the board, because of some things that had taken place in our district, they were ready for positive changes. They were pretty stagnant. The district was as a whole. And I think they were ready to do some things differently. And they recognized too, because like I've got one business leader, when he's trying to make business transactions and bring people to our communities, he has said he has lost customers that would come into our district because parents would look at what's the average ACT score for that school and stuff. And so they recognize that there are some issues, but it's a matter of, making everyone see that maybe we have some things that we can get better at or do differently.
Fred, I want to take a second to welcome Bart Schwartz from Greenbush. Bart had to kick off their Gemini session over there today, and he's going to join in the conversation with us. So Bart, if you have any questions, jump in. It's good to see you.
Fred, I've got a question. I'm just going to jump in there because you've been talking about data all this time, and you said you started off with looking at ACT scores and MAP scores, and the success rate came in sort of later. But I'm just curious, now that you've done this for a year and a half or so, 2 years, are you looking at different data? Are teachers asking for different sorts of metrics? I'm curious.
We're thinking one of the things that Jay and Tammy have done is really tried to set up pretty well, looking at lead and lag measures. Okay. And so when we start talking about those proximal measures and then those distal measures, obviously your ACT scores and things like that, and your post-secondary obviously is a distal one, and your ACT things are, yeah, we're trying to set up actually some pretty proximal scoreboard of data to get people to think differently about student achievement in the now, so that we can see what kinds of things are helpful. This isn't something that I necessarily want broadcast. So those of you that are listening, please understand that that's the cool thing about being in a small district. You know, your mistakes or your successes are just, immediate. And in a small district, your mistakes are just immediate, right? I mean, so everything is about a dichotomy associated with stuff. And so I've been really pushing our principals. We need to have some valid types of scoreboards for the things that you're doing right now to measure some effectiveness. And it's not like, everything is going to be gospel. I don't want to be reactive. I want to be responsive in terms of what we're doing. So, just because something's not working today doesn't mean we don't give it a few days to see if it does work out, right? So one of my principals last week, it was just hilarious. He felt bad because he hadn't really done as much as he felt like he needed to with those scoreboards. And as his very patient and kind and gentle superintendent has said over the course of time, get the damn scoreboards going, a little bit. But I did that in a non-threatening manner, okay? But, and that's one thing, too. I think our team dynamic is pretty good within our leadership team. But what he had done, and this is just the epitome of, it's going to be the best mistake the kid ever made, in that he had taken student information, because we're using the Summit platform. So we have some classes in Summit, some classes are not, right? We had abandoned our eligibility policy knowing that it would not be fair during this transition to penalize kids for not being on pace on a weekly basis for something that we're not real competent in administering. And so, thank goodness we had made that decision last spring before we went down that road. But he put up this, if we were to enact this eligibility list, these are the percent of kids that would be eligible second semester. And he put that up without consulting with his team, his leadership team, without letting anybody know, So he calls me up last Wednesday night and he says, "Hey, Fred," he goes, I put up this scoreboard. And there was this measurable silence between, I said, "Do you really think that was a good idea?" First I said, "Did you consult with your team before you did that?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Do you really think that was a good idea?" He goes, "I don't know." But, we took that chance. So we're modeling a lot of the stuff that we say, that it's okay to make mistakes. Well, the next day I just happened to be over there because we were working on something else. And man, you'd have thought the world had ended. I mean, about half the teachers were mad at him. Half the teachers were happy with him. 90% of the kids were mad at him because, that was a public display of and a reflection of their school. And as I was walking out of the door to go to another meeting, happened to be a class change. Once again, it was just perfect, right? So as I'm going out the door, this one senior kid just grabs me. He didn't physically grab me, but he just says, "Hey, I want to show you something." So we went over to the board, and he is saying, "This is a terrible reflection of us. I can't believe that, Mr. Kimmy would put this up," and going on and on and on. I said, "Don't worry. We're talking about some things, how we're gonna work through this." And I just told the kid, I said, "I'm finally glad that you're angry about academic achievement, because the senior kid that 2 years ago, he would have been, he wouldn't have cared a bit. But, they're more worried about the perception right now. But what that has done in terms of getting some of that data in front of everyone is to getting them talking. Within the next day, there was a measurable change in that data. And the principal was real responsive in going and talking to each groups of those kids, because there were 20 or 30 kids in that hallway that were angry with me as I was walking out the door. And it was so much fun to have that conversation with them. But that data piece, where each one of the buildings is looking at data a little bit differently, but not too much differently. We're all talking about, how can we look at student success? But that student success is also a reflection of teacher success too. So simple things like one building is looking at, and I don't like this initially, but probably is a better idea than the one that I would do, is they're looking at, how many goals are kids setting in the platform, for example. Well, to me, I don't care how many goals a kid sets. I want to know how many they're accomplishing, but we got to start somewhere, because some kids aren't setting any daily goals, or tasks. They're tasks really, so things like that. So we're looking at different types of measurements that aren't always academic, but they're related to academics to help guide whether or not we're currently being successful. And we do a lot of dipsticking too, especially in one of the buildings. They'll send out a lot of surveys and things to the students about, hey, are you liking this change in the schedule? Do you like the power hour? Do you like this? Do you like that? And just to get their feedback, and to staff as well, and some parents too.
So Fred, you're actually starting to collect data on your lead measures that are maybe behavioral, not academic.
Well, but they'll be related to academic, but yes. Yeah, and we're also looking at academic data within the platform. That's another one of those cool things. And I'm not a salesperson for Summit. But we in small schools especially have to have some kind of tool. And since we don't have curriculum specialists, we don't have assessment coordinators, we don't have all that kind of thing that in a larger district, or instructional coaches. It's nice that we have something that has a preloaded valid curriculum that we can manipulate and make ours, that also has the capacity to have assessments aligned to objectives, and we can make instructional decisions based upon those in the now. There can be meaningful grouping of students and things like that we didn't have before. So like before, discussions were, generic in nature in terms of student performance. Now I can go in and see, okay, hey, this parent gave me a call, said Johnny's struggling here with this particular content assessment, for example. I can see if the kid's taken it, how many times, and then I can ask that question of the teacher, or the principal can. What have you done to help the kid? Obviously, what's in there is not working. So what kinds of supports are you providing for that student based upon their deficiencies? And the deficiencies could be behavioral. It could also be academic. It could be learning strategies. And that's a thing that we can never, ever have a conversation like that before, ever. Not legitimately.
Yeah. Well, the takeaway from that, what I just heard, obviously you're doing some really cool stuff with Summit, but what I took away from that last little 3 or 4, 5 minute, like, what new data are you taking or looking at, is that you're talking to your customer, you're talking to your students and asking them questions all along about how they feel about this, what's working for them. That sort of conversation we've never really had with our customer, with our students. I think that's so cool. Actually digging in and trying to find out information from your kids. That's not normal, but in the new normal of redesign, that's something I think we need to really do much more of.
And another thing too, I think is really treating our parents as partners, because like we've had a lot of parent camps. Each building has had at least one. They had one in the spring and they've had one in the fall. And I had a district parent camp in late October. And, we have open sessions in there where parents can ask any questions. And at mine, I just had an open soup session. I was hoping they'd want to talk about budget and stuff, which they didn't, which I was kind of glad, honestly. But it was all about this kind of stuff. And it's trying to get parents to understand, do you know what questions to ask? And so as a result of some of those conversations that were had there, because, those are generic in nature, kind of, I invited several of those parents in, and I actually sat down with them. And I would go through that platform with them as it related to their kid. And, they wanted to know how they could better support their kid. And I would take them through the objectives and things and say, okay, hey, these are questions you can help your student learn with in relation to, okay, let's break down the objectives a little bit. What do the verbs say? That kind of stuff. And because parents don't have that kind of information, obviously that kind of capacity in many respects. And I'm not expecting them to teach their kids. I'm expecting them to ask that question of the teacher. Same thing that I looked at and say, okay, instead of saying my kid's not getting it, my kid's not getting it, and here's an example of evidence where that's not happening for him or her. What are you doing to support it? And the same thing with like instructional strategies and instructional resources. You can go in like at the objective level, like one of the kids was a struggling 7th grade reader, right? Okay. When you look at some of the resources associated with the content, there were 6 resources, 2 of them were map resources, no problem. Okay, 4 of them were reading resources. This is a struggling 7th grade reader. And what was really cool, and sharing that information with teachers is kind of powerful, is that parent had the wherewithal to copy and paste the text, because they were all text-based. Copy and paste the text into a Word document, do the old grammar and spell check, and come up with that 10.3 grade level reading for a struggling 7th grade reader. That's not working. So that goes back into, it'll take us time to really vet all of that stuff to make sure that there are appropriate resources in there for kids at their level to where they can be successful, providing that scaffolding. I could never have done that before with a previous tool. And it's not that I want to micromanage what teachers are doing. What we're doing with all of this stuff, and we say it all the time, is we're trying to set up a mutual system of accountability. And it's helping in that regard. But it also forces you to be coachable, which is also difficult for a lot of teachers because they're used to being in their own islands.
Winnable game.
But Fred, you appear on the surface to be a proponent of Summit Learning.
I'm going to be honest. I looked for ways to shoot that sucker down 100-to-1 because I am not a proponent of a canned program. I am not. I do not like just canned stuff off the shelf because the teachers have to own it and make it theirs, right? But what this does do it better in some respects. But what this does do, but that's where the teachers come in. That's where that art of teaching comes in. Is it gives them that base curriculum that they could use, and then they could infuse their projects in there that might be more meaningful than the ones that are there. Because I like the fact that it's got content assessments in there that support the content associated with the project. So when I look at that need for project-based learning to create meaningful experiences or there's moments for kids, the pedagogy associated with it is really, really good. The 16 habits of success and like the 36 cognitive skills that they evaluate all the projects with, all that stuff I really, really like from a learning perspective. I think it's pretty solid. But I just think there's going to be a lot of bugs that we have to work out of that in order for it to be really, really knock down, drag out for our kids. But I think it really can. That's why I'd love to see the state continue to support it a little bit.
Well, and we were talking the other day, we had 80 some school teachers and administrators for our Gemini 2 redesign meeting. And we were talking to some Newton middle school teachers and principal, and they said the same thing about Summit Learning, is that there are parts they don't like, but the philosophy behind it of really, the habits of mind and those sorts of things, they really enjoy, and they're just trying to find ways to take the best parts of that and integrate it into the things that they know work. But it's they kept saying it's the philosophy behind the structure of the tool that they really like.
It's pretty powerful, guys. It really is, but once again, and this was my problem with going that direction, some of our teachers really, really like it, and they're using it, with efficacy, but it's almost like they're using it with too much efficacy, and that it's taking some of that them out of it a little bit. Some of our teachers don't like it because they feel like it's taking too much of that them. It's not theirs out of it. So that's, we've got to have that time to help get through that messy middle of this to where we really have solid curriculum that is Twin Valleys curriculum, based upon our staff. But once again, it needs to be valid. Before we had no valid curriculum other than the textbooks that we gave our teachers, frankly. So it does. I just wish I think sometimes the projects need to be more meaningful, and I think that they need to be more that gives that kid that want to get after it type of thing, because a lot of them are writing based projects, which not horrible necessarily, and obviously math's different, but I think that also will change with time if we can get some more Buck Institute and other types of project-based learning training that's really high level for our teachers, because that pedagogy fits within the platform.
Well, Fred, now I am not an expert on Summit Learning, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was if you decide to go Summit Learning, it's pretty much all or not at all, nothing. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
You're either going to use it or you're not. You're not going to modify it.
Well, no, you could modify the curriculum. Yeah. They suggest that first year that you use the base curriculum just because it's such a heavy lift, and they're not incorrect in that regard. It is a tremendously heavy lift for our teachers. It is a total mindset change for them in terms of how they do things, because it's just so, feedback is required at checkpoints within projects. Content assessments have to be released in order for you to take them. It's a whole different way of looking at stuff. There's advisory components built within there for mentoring and stuff. So it is a huge mindset change. They do say that you implement it like in a grade level across all the content areas. That's non-negotiable, and that's one of the things that we struggled with initially, because that wasn't our plan. We were going to give teachers the opportunity to pick one class, like at the high school level, for example. Well, some have said no, it's all or none in relation to grade levels. So that's been kind of hard for some of our staff.
Okay. Bart, do you have any questions for us about Summit Learning specifically?
Well, no, I was really interested in, hey, we've had a couple more join us here too. Mark and Jennifer with our school improvement folks. I was interested in hearing that conversation about Summit, because we have districts asking the same questions too. I think what they're wrestling with is Summit has some prescribed curriculum, if you will, and a method for tracking. But I think what some of our districts are wondering is, do they just want a way to be able to establish their own personalized learning, but purchase or develop a system for tracking what that looks like? Or do they also want the curriculum that goes with it? And I think they're wrestling about those two things right now. I'm curious what anybody else thinks related to that.
Fred, do you want to address that?
Well, I mean, like I said, through the training that you get, they recommend that first year that you stay with the base curriculum. And I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Well, actually, I think it's a good deal just from the capacity of the teachers. We're a small district. Our staff are single-person departments for the most cases, especially at the secondary level. So, like all of our freshmen, for example, over in one attendance center, they're all their core classes are on Summit. The rest of them are not necessarily. There's a couple of them that are scattered. So that's the one that is having the most academic difficulty right now, because it's this transition time. But I just think because of the way the way the system is set up, that particular system, it is such a shift, because just looking at how the grades are figured, 70% of your grade is to projects, approximately 30% of your grade is to content. Okay, and the content is broken up into what they call power focus areas, which is 21%, and then additional focus areas, which is the 9. Well, that becomes real confusing when you're used to going into power school and seeing an A, B, C, D, or F. And it's confusing for kids and it's confusing for parents. You don't get a grade within that system until a project has been completed. And the projects are all evaluated based upon rubrics that are associated with those cognitive skills. And those cognitive skills are assessed throughout the system, grades 4 through 12, but the cognitive skills are pretty darn valid, and they have a sliding rubric and grade level appropriate rubrics that evaluate those cognitive skills. So like those projects aren't anchored, they're anchored in content, but they're not evaluated by the content within the projects. It's the cognitive skills they're evaluated on. So it's the thinking that goes into that more so than the content. But I think one of the issues that we struggle with is our teachers understanding or making sure that our kids understand and our parents. And it goes back to that cognitive load theory, that if you don't have some kids, if they don't have content knowledge, they'll struggle with project-based learning because they don't have the background within which to base the projects. And that's what the purpose of those power focus areas and focus areas are. So but you can personalize, quite a bit of that if you want to. It just takes time. And when you have 7 preps, you don't have a lot of time. So
Yeah.
in a small.
So would you say those kind of cognitive thinking skills, is that a synonym for the math practice standards that are a part of our standards document, or are they different from those?
I could give you the list. I mean, obviously don't have them memorized because you could do a search for Summit cognitive skills and you'll be able to find that list of cognitive skills. And you might even be able to find the list of rubrics in which they evaluate them with, because they use different rubrics that are grade level appropriate, stuff like that. So I think that they're pretty solid, or we wouldn't have gone that route. But I think that they're not perfect, but I'd rather look at proficiency scales. But this is okay. The rubrics are okay.
Okay. And then I think I heard you say there was some focus areas or focus standards. Do those equate to the Kansas focus, the documents that came out from the Kansas standards?
They do not align with the Kansas standards at this time. Obviously, this is a West Coast company, and so it's really frustrating for some of our social studies people because they're West Coast standards. They're supposed to be working on a Kansas history. Hopefully for second semester, they'll have that for us. I'm not sure where they are on that. So that's been a frustrating part for our social studies people. One of the things I think that if there was enough interest across the state, I know that Dr. Watts wouldn't mind looking into supporting something like this, because like I said, in us smaller districts, we really don't have the time or the personnel to write curriculum, other than the resources that we provide for our teachers, which has kind of been standard, I think, in most districts, even though they say they have a curriculum guide sitting on a shelf. Unless you have assessments that are valid assessments tied to the curriculum, it's kind of hard to say that it's that valid. The one thing nice about the the focus areas that are power focus and additional that make up that 30% is that they are objective based, and you can change assessment components associated with the objectives. You can go in and you change the question level if you think the questions are too difficult. You can also change resources associated with those objectives and things like that, or you can interject your own. So there's some pretty cool stuff there, but it is not perfect. I do not want to say that it is perfect, because we've had issues with inappropriate content, and stuff like that we've had to deal with. We've just been luckier than some others in that regard.
Okay, thank you for sharing.
Fred, one of the questions I have about it is that it appears when we look at the definition of a successful Kansan, you have the academic piece covered.
Yeah.
You have the cognitive piece covered. One of the big things that came out and when Randy and Brad did the town hall meetings were those employability skills. And I don't see those kinds of behaviors being reinforced in Summit Learning. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, you're wrong, Steve. The normal.
Shocker.
But that goes back to things like setting goals and things like that. We have the mentor system. We kind of put that in place before Summit last year. And the nice thing about some of the Summit stuff is that, we're getting our kids to think, okay, put some forethought into what you're doing. So plan for your instruction, plan for your learning that day and stuff. So yeah, I think that it's not perfect within there. But when you just talk about those kinds of skills, yeah, some of those are in there more so than they were before, because we never let kids take control of any of that in the past. What are you going to do today? We've also created opportunities in that regard. In one of the buildings, they created what they call a power hour, and you guys are probably familiar with that, to where our lunch hour is an hour long, and half of that time teachers are available, for kids. And we've actually kind of iterated that some over this last semester, in that they actually have scheduled workshops for content areas for kids that are struggling in those content areas. So like math will be on Monday, Tuesday will be English, social studies on, so on and so forth. And then one day is an open day. So, and coming up, they're changing all the time to respond to the needs of kids. If we have a lot of kids that aren't being successful in some areas, they'll target those kids and get them into those workshops. So we're trying to promote some agency there, but we've got to remember, we haven't taught these kids any of this stuff, you know, and so we're having to teach a lot of this stuff, and we're not successful with it, but we're working at that to become more successful in that regard. You know, and that's one of the things that's a struggle with some of the teachers, you know, well, they just didn't do it. Okay. What are we doing to teach them that it's important for them to get this done, and what, you know, the consequences are if it's not, you know, those kinds of they just can't go on and leave the kids there. They have to have something in place to help those kids. And we're also looking at that social emotional piece of that too, Steve. I think there's a lot of stress associated with this change in our kids and our parents. And so we've infused trauma-informed practices. We've had the boot camp done by James and Moffitt and Cindy Blasey from Derby Hills. We're starting self-regulation through TASN beginning in a week. We're going to have restorative practices training for a cadre of lead teachers and administrators in December. So we're trying to plan for those things as much as we can. But man, it's our folks are pretty tapped out, man. They're tired. I mean, we're just beating the hell out of them right now. But they're invested though. I mean, most of them.
Go
ahead.
I guess I'm just curious. That's a great question, because we hear that from teachers or administrators all the time. How do you ensure that? How do you get teachers to invest in that, or how do you get your staff to say, "Yeah, I'm all tapped out, but that's a good thing because it's good for kids"? What were the things that you did that were successful to get teachers down that path?
I didn't do anything. You know, I just sat back and play cards and just go around the buildings and hang out. Our principals have done a great job in that regard, and we've really, like I said, we've tried to bring everybody along at the same time as much as possible. And I've been pretty clear in the message. You know, when I first took the job, and my first talk to all staff was, "I'm not here to change you. I'm here to change the system, and we'd love to have you go with us, but that's kind of your choice." And, you know, that kind of stuff. And I've just been trying to promote that message as much as possible. When I have meetings with staff about some of the things that we're doing, you know, I ask them 3 questions. Do you really think the things we're doing is being done to make you mad? Do you think the things that we're doing is not research-based and solid? And do you think that this is the easiest thing to do? So I ask them those 3 questions too pretty often. But the principals have done such a good job of involving their staffs in this direction that there are many of those staff members, not all of them, many of those staff members would be tremendously upset if we pulled the plug, you know. But they have to understand, you know, too, they've got to be coachable during part of this. We've got one of our best teachers that is probably not doing some things honestly within that classroom that they should be doing. So that principal is providing coaching for that teacher. And that's hard when you've always been a rock star to take that coaching. And we're really trying to make that mutual system of accountability. So we try to keep ourselves open for criticism, you know, and for direction, you know, from our staff. We're trying to emulate that as much as possible. And it's just a lot of effort and being very visible and accessible to those staff. Because I go to most of the building leadership meetings. I sit back as a drunk uncle in the back and pop off about things that they want to do. But, you know, I just think they have to know we're all in this together always, as much as we can. And they picked that up pretty well. I mean, but it's not perfect. We lost staff because of this last year. We may lose some this next year too. But that's okay. That's okay. I think it's a better place because of that.
Well, I like the fact that, I mean, drunk uncle or not, the fact that your face is there and that you're part of that conversation, whether you participate or not. I mean, obviously part of what I do and what we do is to work with teachers directly. And that, I think maybe is more powerful than you give yourself credit for, that teachers see that everybody's involved, like you said, that the superintendent is going to take time out of his or her day to be a part of this conversation and, you know, to struggle along with the rest of us. That's a huge piece, I think, that sometimes we don't pay enough attention to or realize how important it is.
Well, one thing that was fun this year was that we meet as a leadership team every Friday morning. And I hate meetings for the sake of meetings. I think they need to be meaningful. And, God, they just went on forever. And, you can talk to my previous dudes in my previous district. It seemed like it was the same thing. But unless you sit down and talk through some of those, and I thought my principals were getting tired of that. I really did, because, and it wasn't all me. It was just like, there's just stuff I want to make sure that's done well. Right. And so we have a living agenda. It lives on every week. We just move it to the next week and we change the things that are on there. And I was just trying to get them out. And one of my principals, who thought that this probably was making them the most frustrated, he said, stop that. He said, we need this time, because we need this time to talk through all these things, because if we don't, we won't hold each other accountable for that. So too, it's like that, those different hierarchical pieces that are all together, and we're trying to remove the hierarchy as much as possible, and we do in those meetings. But that was one of those kind of reaffirming things a little bit, that you have to deal with all the nuances within things. You just can't paint things with a broad brush and expect to have success at the fringes within that brushstroke. So
Fred, we're seeing that in the discussions that we're having with schools is you don't understand all this the first time you talk about it. It's over and over and over, and make sense of it. It doesn't happen overnight.
No, I agree.
Fred, I have a question for you, and then I'm going to encourage any of our people that are online to ask questions. We talked about the cognitive, the academic, and the employability. What are you doing with civic engagement and technical skills? Those other two components of the definition of a successful Kansan.
Some of the things that they're doing at the building level with civic engagement, they're trying to get kids engaged in service projects, obviously. That's kind of a common theme across the state, but getting them to recognize the needs of their community and stuff like that. So like in one building, for example, they've got one teacher at one of the secondary buildings, one teacher that's assigned to helping organize advisory groups for engaging in some sort of civil service. For example, like when I had my parent camp, I just sent that dude a message and said, hey, I need some kids that would serve as just navigators in the building during that parent camp and help administer cookies and make sure the drinks are filled and things like that. Can you come up with 8 or 9 kids? And he worked with the different teachers and groups, and I had like 12 kids show up that night for that. Of course, they're doing that partially for service hours that they need for some of their organizations they're involved, but some of them just do that for the sake of that. Trying to get them involved. Like today, I know one of the grades is going to rake leaves for some community members and some businesses that are on the that need that service done and things.
Can I send you my address?
Well, we said people that need it or people that deserve it.
Oh.
That's kind of that's a kind of a hard part. I mean, this year, with the elections and things, like obviously, there were things done in that regard. Just that civic duty type of thing. But that's a hard part a little bit, because like I said, of the other areas that our folks, everything is spread so thin. We're doing as much as we can to the best of our ability right now. So it's not a cop-out. It's just a reality. I'm not going to, because we had one person, a different person was in charge of that civic connection. And because of that person's load that they had with the new platform, he just said, man, I can't do all of this. So that was a cool thing that he recognized that, and another person was able and willing to step up and take that over.
Well, and you can't do everything at once.
Yeah, we can't.
Now, Fred, on the technical side, I do know you brought a bunch of kids to our Career Expo. What else are you doing with the technical skill side?
Well, we're trying to make sure that our kids, and most schools have done this kind of stuff too, we're getting them on different types of campuses, all from grade 7 through 12. Actually 7 through 11, 12th grade, we give a lot more latitude though. Like we went to your expo with the junior kids. We're going to go to, there's a group of freshman kids out at Hayes today for a leadership thing. We'll get them to Beloit Technical College. We'll get them to KSU Salina, Salina Tech, KCAC schools, junior colleges, Regents universities. So we're doing that rotation of things. We're also this year finally getting people on our campuses that relate to the career cruising data that we have on potential careers that our kids want to be involved with. Okay, so that's something we're finally getting going. I say that because dang it, I wanted that my first year here, but once again, we're biting off what we can chew, and we've got a person assigned to do that more so now. So, and we struck up a little bit of a relationship with the Salina Chamber of Commerce. We need to do more to culture that because there's so many opportunities down there for our kids. Like just a visit to the hospital gets like 14 of the 16 pathways, and so we can structure some of that stuff. So our counselors are looking out for that all the time, as are our principals. And we take those kids to those places and try to bring it to them, or take them to the places or bring the places to us as much as we can. I'd like to see us
we recognize how difficult it is to do those technical skills in small rural schools. You're fairly fortunate because of proximity to Salina.
tremendously. Yeah. We got to leverage it more, but.
Let me pause for a second. Robert or Becky or Max or Randy or John, any questions or thoughts that you want to add? I know 3 of you are in Redesign schools. Questions or comments for Fred? If you'll just turn, Max, go ahead.
Hey, Fred, this is Max. Hey, when do you implement Summit Learning at the grade school?
This fall. We implemented it 4 through 12. Well,
4 through 12?
Secondary level, not all the way in one building, but.
So what did you do? You start with the freshmen in the secondary building and you're going to build up through that, or you?
In the one building, yeah. In the other building, it is 7 through 12 within the core content areas with those that they can do it in, like college algebra. Some of those dual credit courses, obviously we don't use it in that, but within core curriculum, yes. But 4 through 8 throughout the district, they are the core curriculum is in Summit.
And you talk about those dual courses. Do you see that staying the same for
Yes.
you to move forward?
Yeah,
That's what I'm kind of seeing as an elective type course that you could keep and then still introduce Summit.
Yeah, we're not going to put those in the platform at all. No, we're just going to continue those as they have been.
Okay, knowing your background in education, you've seen the math. Can you tell me a little more about the math? Something that we didn't get to see. I don't know a lot about. They said it's very conceptual. I don't know. It doesn't. I just wonder. Can you say anything about the math? How does that look like?
Well, they don't have like the project based. I would call that more problem based learning than project based learning with the mathematics, which I think is a good thing. But yeah, it's a good mix of conceptual and traditional, probably. I mean, that's probably the best way to describe it. But I can have some of my teachers, you could talk to some of them. They would be better to tell you the ins and outs of the math. It is enough different than the other 3 content areas in that they don't have that project base. It's more problem based.
Fred, are those problems real world problems in math?
Yeah, they are. But then it's honestly, math within Summit is a lot more traditional than in terms of we print a lot of paper for them to do their problems on because they have to work them out to show the teachers the processes and stuff within them. Like I said, my math teachers could tell you better than I about that. I'm a science guy. I look with the science stuff. All right.
Max, I see you muted your microphone. Any other questions?
Not right now. I need to go to another meeting. So I appreciate you, Fred, getting on, and I appreciate ESSDACK for making this happen.
Take care, Max.
Thanks, Max. Fred, let's go back to when you applied. No pushback from your board, but how about your teachers? You had to have 80% of your teachers and the Teachers Association on board. Tell us about that experience.
Well, we were lucky. Nobody knew what the heck they were getting into, right? I mean, when you're the first, it's a little easier in that regard because I think we had set up the stage fairly well. Of course, we had a year. We still had credibility. We weren't stupid yet. We became stupid year 2, and now we're really stupid year 3. So we had credibility based upon some of the things that we were wanting to do. So it wasn't an issue getting that 80%. Our board targeted the 2 attendance centers that they wanted to have this take place in. But as a function of our application, we said we're going to build it K through 12 within the district, within both K through 12 attendance centers. So but we did not get the 80% of the one staff that we also engaged in the redesign, in parallel, which looking back, we probably should have done that. We really probably should have done that, because that was the most pushback that we've had is from that staff in terms of wanting to engage in change.
What would you do different now if you were giving advice to our superintendents that are on with us today or watch the video of this? What would you have done different, knowing what you know now?
Well, like I said, we would have made sure that all staff that were going to be involved would have participated in the vote. There's probably just little things along the way that we would have done differently, maybe. It's kind of tough to tell because we really haven't been through enough of the implementation to really say what we would do differently. I think our principals have done some really, really good things from a cultural perspective in establishing a good culture within those buildings. I don't know if we would do a lot of things different right now. I just can't say, hey, we really, really screwed that up. And it's not that we've done it well. I don't want anybody to think that, because, man, you could go back and look at some of this stuff and you say, why in the hell did you do that? But it's kind of working. But we have a lot of issues that we have to attend to, and we just have to be a lot more responsive, I think. But that once again is going to come with time and experience. So we haven't done anything perfect at all. But the biggest takeaway that I would really stress is that you've got to bring your people along, knowing that half of them won't know what it is. Even if you tell them 1,000 times, a quarter of them won't think you're doing it because they've never had to be. Every initiative has been optional in education. And that's that one thing that I tell everybody is the difference between this, and I've been involved in enough initiatives. You create pockets of excellence. You really do, for those people that you provide that great for, or that really want to make the change and they see the need. And for everyone else, that's optional because you don't have capacity in which to ensure it's being done with efficacy. And so if you're going to really redesign, that is not optional. And that's the biggest hurdle, is to get everybody to understand it's not optional. That's why you've got to have as much as possible everyone with you to support it, to where those that don't are in the minority, and they still make noise. But the noise gets drowned out by the better things that are taking place, or the better future that those other folks have seen because of the vision that you've tried to instill.
Fred, do you feel good about the things you're doing for kids?
Yeah, we're here for kids, and that's why I tell them. I tell them that the first week I was here too. We're a social service for children, not adults. You got to just keep that in mind when we start talking about doing what we're doing. So, and I'm kind of an old idiot too. I just have a little fun with it, and I say that kind of stuff in jest a little bit, but I think the point needs to be made very clear that we are not here for the adults in the system. We are here for the kids, and we've got to help parents more than we've been helping them. And, we've got to provide them with tools, and we can't do that alone either. So we've got to latch on to other services outside. Some of the stuff like Rebecca's doing there with the trauma-informed and with the poverty stuff. Those are things when in my previous district that really changed my mind on us doing this alone. We cannot. We have to involve others. So I talked to them.
Talk a little bit about the response of kids.
We have kids that hate it. We really do. We have kids that love it, and we have kids that are just putting up with it. But last year we had kids that hated what we were doing too, and the year before, we just never asked them. And yeah. I have two different superintendent advisory groups that I bring in. And one of them is the leadership group of your student council that you consider leadership. And the other one is the non-leadership group, those kids that don't do anything. And I bring them in at different times, but we ask them the same questions and try to compare and contrast their responses. And about a week ago, we had that second group of kids in that were not necessarily our leadership kids, but they're leaders. They're just informal leaders. And to hear some of their stories about, you know, I'm successful now. I thought I was always a loser because everyone essentially affirmed that based upon my performance in school, you know, but now I know what I got to do. I know that I'm in control and I can do it. And they're doing it. We have kids that are passing classes that have never passed classes before, you know.
That's awesome.
But on the opposite end of that, we've got kids that were great at school that are struggling because it was always before, this is the game, this is exactly how you play it, this is the day you play it, this is the way you play it, this is the result you'll get. So we have parents that are balking at that as well. So once again, this is the messy middle of the change process that we know we got to put up with. We're not asking our kids in a survey, do you like Summit, right? But we never asked them before, did you like Holt Reinhardt chemistry, right?
Yeah.
We are asking them things, do you like the advisor period? Does your advisor help you? Or, you know, are you finding Power Hour useful? You know, are you seeing success academically? Those kinds of things in terms of some of the results we're trying to get to. So our kids are struggling though, but it's a good struggle.
Yeah. And when you change, there's going to be some kids that were winners in the old system that don't win as much in the new system.
Yeah. But we've got to attend to those kids, though. And that's one of the things, too, like in conversations with principals. It's so funny because, you know, we will sometimes discount the outlier. Oh, that's just that one parent, right? Oh, that's just that one kid. No, it's not. No, we have to be responsive. If we're here for each individual kid, we've got to be responsible to the needs of that individual kid and that individual parent. You will not discount that, you know. And those have been really fun conversations we've had, you know. I mean, and that's the cool thing too, though. Like within our leadership team, we can have those conversations, and they get heated, man. I mean, they really do. But we walk out of there knowing why we're there, and we all change our position a little. Because I tell my guys all the time too, I don't have to be right, but we do with what we're doing for kids. You know, so that's why we really work hard to try to really come together as a team.
Fred, we've kept you a long time, but I have a couple more things I want you to touch on, perhaps briefly, as long as you want to spend on them. But we've got 5 state goals. Kindergarten readiness, how's that played into it?
Well, we're fortunate in that we've got a pretty good early learning program here. We have an at-risk pre-K, which we would like to expand that. I mean, honestly, our board doesn't turn away any pre-K kids. You know, we get funded for the slots we get funded for, and we'll accept any of those pre-K kids. So we have a lot of model kids in there as well. We have a parents as teachers program that's been real successful within the district for several years. That had nothing to do with me. I'd like to see us expand some of that stuff, but once again, it goes to money. Because our goal from a financial perspective with new dollars is to raise our base salary. Our base is so crappy. It was the lowest in the area by a lot when I first got here. Now we're second to lowest, and we're not that far behind a neighboring district. And you know, so we not that we want to beat anybody. It's just that it's tough with Salina being south of us. You know, they get $5 or $6 grand right off the bat more than my teachers do.
Yeah.
So our early learning is not horrible. It's not been a huge area of emphasis because of what we already have in place, but we always look to improve it.
Yeah. You've kind of addressed a lot of the social emotional. How about individual plans of study?
Yeah, we put that in place our first year here, and we tried to enhance that more. You know, that's been the cool thing about the advisory too, is that they spend a lot of time with those kids, you know, on those individual plans of study, in addition to the current academic, you know, progress the kids making. And we have student-led conferences. This will be our second year for that. We struggled with that last year a little bit. Some parents, it was change, you know. We had some parents that show up at that dadgum conference, and no matter what, by gosh, they would not go to that mentor meeting with that teacher. They would wait until there was a minute, you know, in between a mentor meeting of another so they could get to that. And they just, by God, would not go. I'm just like going, really? Come on, man. You know?
Come on, man.
So, you know, but that's I think we're okay there. Honestly, we haven't revisited that this year at all because of the stuff that we're doing, you know, with the mentoring and stuff. So I'm not that's not an area of concern. I did bring that up the other day with our principals, though, and we have our counselors meeting with us next week. And we'll have that conversation. Where are we with this? You know, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Are we doing this with efficacy? Why or why not? What can we do to help?
Yeah. And again, you can't do everything at once.
No, but you can't let anything slide either. If you're doing it, you need to continue. That goes back to that mutual system of accountability we got to make sure we have in place.
Yeah. Graduation rates.
They're okay. You know, I mean, we're above the state average. There's no complaints there. I mean, you know, in one building, you know, we got 100% graduation rate, but 38 or 34% post-secondary success. So I'm going, okay, you know, so what they graduate, how meaningful is that in terms of them being successful afterwards? So that's fine.
Fred, that brings up a really good point. We have had the opportunity to visit with schools that'll say, we're doing redesign. We've been doing it for a long time. But you look at their success rates and their kids aren't being successful. You've had to link the two, haven't you?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Because if you make a change that doesn't lead to success for more kids, that was the wrong change.
Yeah. You know, it was kind of funny when we were recognized at the state board meeting. It was fun. It was cool and stuff like that. But Secretary of Labor maybe at the state level was sitting there. You know, we've got I think it was Nick Jordan. Is that correct? With the previous one or whatever. And we've got to create a workforce. We got to create a workforce. We got to create a workforce. And I'm going, no, man, we got to create happy Kansans. You know, happy Kansans that are capable to go out and get employment, but they do so in a meaningful way to where they live a fulfilled life. I'm not here to make a workforce for you. I'm here to make people. You know,
there's two sides to that coin, aren't there?
There is, because you're happy if, you know, with meaningful work. I mean, I get that. That's what the research will also tell you. But I'm not here to produce a person that goes down to Tony's Pizza, working a swing shift and hates it for the rest of their life. You know what I mean? I'm here to produce that person that might work that swing shift for the rest of their life because they're making the money they need or want to do the things that they want to do on the side. I don't care what their end goal is. I just want them happy when they reach that.
Yeah, and I always add a third goal for my sons. I want them to be happy. I wanted them to be gainfully employed, and I wanted them out of the basement.
Yeah, well.
Selfishly there.
Check.
Check. There, we're good to go. Hey, Fred, any last comments, thoughts for the folks out here?
I'm telling you, we're not doing anything special. I want to make that very, very clear. We have been real lucky. You know, I like to think at times we make our own luck in some situations, but honestly, I think that, you know, we have been lucky in the situation that we have with a very supportive board, you know, Board of Education. The thing that I'll harp on all the time is if you want to go down this road, which I think you really should for your kids, is that you've got to bring everybody along as much as possible at the same time, knowing it's never enough. It was never the right stuff. It was never at the right time. It was never in the right way. And, you know, just being empathetic in terms of the plight of those people, your teachers, your parents, and your kids, and never ignore the outlier. Never ignore the outlier because they're also part of your system. And, you know, I think that's important. And also understand that this is not optional. If you go down the road, it's not optional for staff. And that once again goes back to bringing them all at the same pace. So, you know, we're not doing anything that most of the people in the state of Kansas aren't trying to do. We really aren't. We're not special. We got some real hardworking people, just like you all do where you're at, that care a lot about kids, that are trying to do the right things. We're you know, we just are what we are, and we've just been real fortunate. So,
Fred, you may have hit on the biggest thing. You truly have an intense focus on each student being successful, and you want to do good things for your adults, but not at the expense of doing good things for the kids.
That's it. Amen. Yeah.
Clint, other last comments, questions?
Well, Fred, I'm assuming that we can post your contact information in the show notes underneath this archived webinar later, so that other administrators, teachers, interested parties can get in touch with you, visit or talk or chat. Hopefully
Sure.
that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. My email address is johndink@USD.
We'll make sure.
And reach out to my principals too. Those folks and their building leadership teams. They've done the work. They really have.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we never, as you figured out, hell, I have no problem talking. So we enjoy a conversation.
We'll post those email addresses and contact information as well, because again, it all comes down to asking questions and talking to other people, and we all walk away smarter when we share information like this. So thanks, Fred. Appreciate it very much.
Fred, thank you. This has been great. We'll get this video processed and out to all of our superintendents just as soon as possible. And I know they'll appreciate it because they're all interested in this topic.
Well, just edit out the bad stuff. How about that? Edit out the times that I probably said something inappropriate.
No, those are they go in the highlight reel.
It's going to be titled Drunk Uncle Shares Info. That's what we're going to talk.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hey, Fred, thanks.
Take care. See ya.
Glenn, your final thoughts. What's become clear to you?
The importance of talking to kids and getting information from kids. I love that part. That idea of having conversations and collecting data from your customers. And that's just, and Fred said it multiple times, we don't do that very often.
Touch base all the time with
we're
them.
always getting feedback. He said dipstick, and we're trying to collect data. And this is a new piece of data that we've never thought to collect or bother to collect in the past, of just actually talking to your kids. And those 2 advisory councils, bringing kids in and chatting with them, we don't do that, and we need to. I think that's awesome that he was sharing that information.
I'm going to throw in a tidbit here.
Wait.
So
Go. I'm ready.
okay, and being able to remember back 25 years is I should get an attaboy for that. But when QPA came out, I was on the QPA team at Medicine Lodge, and Bud Moore was the principal.
Yeah.
And he created, instead of a traditional student council, he started in the spring. The first day, he took all of his juniors to the gym, and he said, go stand in the corner with your friends. Okay, and they did. And then he said, pick somebody to represent your group, one person. So, all the kids that hated school and, the black fingernail polish and all, they picked somebody.
Yeah.
Then they did it the next day with their sophomore class, freshmen, then they went to the 8th grade.
Yeah.
They did elect a class president.
Yeah.
In a traditional way. But he said it was the best student council they ever had because they got all the points of view.
That's awesome.
And you know who those kids picked to represent them.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't pick a wallflower.
No.
They picked the kid that would stand up and for them.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, I thought that would be a really appropriate way in a small school to create an advisory council.
Yeah.
So,
I like that.
anything happened at the redesign meeting this past week of note?
No, I think the feedback we got from districts was they really liked having the chance to plan and talk with other people, not just in their own teams, but cross district teams. And we intentionally did that, was to try to break people up. And this time we broke them up by grade level. And so you had conversations with like-minded individuals
From other districts.
And
cross-pollination.
That was really useful. And that's where, when I mentioned earlier about hearing from the Newton Middle School, because I was cross-pollinating with middle school teachers, because those are my people. That's where I heard them talking about the power of Summit Learning, obviously, is some of the data collection piece and the organization, the structure, but they kept coming back to the philosophy. And Fred mentioned that multiple times as well. It's like, this is what good education can look like, that philosophy. And again, I'm not a Summit, sales rep, but the idea that these habits of mind, these best practices of how we want kids to learn are embedded in that. And so that was something that was really fun. This last Tuesday was just watching teachers. Oh, sorry, last week. I can't remember. I'm waiting for turkey. So
yeah,
my mind's a little.
Well, this is Tuesday, so.
Well, yeah, I'm a little confused. Last week, that was one of the things I took away, was just the fun that the learning that can happen when we talk with other districts. So this conversation with Fred, sharing everything that works for him and what hasn't worked for him, I think is powerful.
Next month, we'll try to get another superintendent on.
Yep.
If we can.
Maybe some teachers.
Yeah. And we would love
kids.
Yeah, we'd love to get the pilot teachers,
Yeah.
the pilot and co-pilot.
Yeah.
But some kids, that would be really interesting.
We'll have to work on that.
We can work on that. And I appreciate, we tried to spread it around the state. We had Bart from Greenbush.
Yeah.
Fred's actually in the north central part of the state, works with Smoky Hill. So we're trying to involve the service centers, and we'll continue to do that. So, hey, thanks for joining us,
Appreciate it.
and we'll see you again next month.